of our series on Hot Girl Summer and products that we don't need to be using, or at least I won't say don't need to be using, we need to be aware of because maybe they're not in the best interest for us with the climate. So I am going to pass the mic over to Diamond and let her give us some more jewels on our Sage Exchange today. We appreciate you coming and we're excited to learn more.
Of course. Thank you so much, Joy. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Mm, Okay. Can you guys see this in full screen or no? No, it doesn't look like it. Let me try it again. Okay. Okay. All right. What about full screen now? Are we good?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Perfect. Thank you. It's like you would think I wouldn't have any problems how long I've been using Zoom, but it is what it is. Hello, everybody. I'm super excited to chat with y'all again today. Shout out to the folks who were here yesterday. But if you haven't been here, it's great to meet you. I'm excited to talk today all about hot girls hate extreme heat. And it is very hot right now. So this is a very timely conversation. So again, my name is Diamond Spratling. I'm the founder and executive director at Girl Plus Environments. I am based in Atlanta, but originally a Midwest girl from Detroit. I've been working at the intersection of environmental justice, health equity, racial justice, all the things in between for the past 12 or so years now. In addition to all the work that I do, I really love to travel, dine, cook, and all those things in between, working and building out a national organization. So, if you're new here and not familiar with Girl Plus Environments, we are a national 501c3 nonprofit based in Atlanta with over about 900 members now across 30 or 41 different states in the US. Our work spans from educating, engaging, and empowering Black and Brown women and femmes to essentially shift the narrative and understand how our climate and our environments are impacting our health and well being every single day. And so a lot of that work kind of falls into three different places. So the first one is around our digital campaigns, which essentially meets our millennial and Gen Z members where they are, which is on social media all day, and using that as an avenue to get them to take different climate actions that they wouldn't normally think that they can be involved in, but they absolutely can. In addition to that, we do a lot of community building through our national member base program. We're also in the process of early stages building out a university chapter across some campuses and essentially moving Black and Brown women up this ladder of engagement. So you go from awareness all the way up into feeling comfortable to talk to your representatives about issues that impact you every single day. The last pillar of our work is actually around our advocacy training program. And so that's really our flagship program we've been doing for the past 4 years now, 4 to 5 years at this point, which is basically a cohort that we select of about 25 Black and Brown women every year to go through a series of trainings and provide funding so that they can put to test what they've learned all around advocacy. So that's really where both of our work lies, but feel free to visit our website as well for any other additional information. All right, well, let's jump into what we're going to be talking about today, which I'm super excited. So, a few of the learning objectives I'm hoping to kind of leave this conversation with is one, making sure that we all have an understanding of what in the world extreme heat is, especially now, and most importantly, why it's getting worse. Learning about how heat disproportionately impacts Black communities, Black women, recognizing signals of heat related illnesses so that you all know what to do and how to tell other people what to do. And then building a personal heat resilience plan, what that looks like. And then hopefully being able to leave here today with some concrete actions that you can take with yourself, your home, your community, all the above. So that's what I'm hoping to get done today. I know we've only got a little bit of time today, so we'll see, but I'm happy to adapt. And of course, like always, I'll leave some time at the end for any questions that you might have. So feel free to interact in the chat if you have some questions. All right. So before we jump into the actual content, I love to always ask people, what is your relationship with summer? Feel free to write in the chat how you feel about summer. If you're like, oh my gosh, I love summer, I wait for it every single year. Or maybe you avoid going outside, or maybe you are concerned about your electric bill every year, or maybe you have experienced some type of heat related illness. So I'll give folks a moment to go ahead and write in the chat what your thoughts are. You can put an emoji if you feel compelled to do that. Yeah, I want to know what people's thoughts are around summer. I know for me, I'm a summer baby, August 29th, and growing up, I always loved summer, especially someone who grew up in a place like Detroit that had terrible, terrible winters. And so I was always excited about summer. But now, having living in Atlanta, that's very, very hot and gets very humid. Sometimes I'm waiting for fall nowadays, to be completely honest. So, yeah, I see some folks here absolutely love being outside in nature during the summer. Yes, I'm a nature girly as well. I used to love it in the beach, but in Atlanta, I miss having natural spaces to cool off in nearby. Yes, absolutely. I love just like walking into random shops to really just cool down. I'm like, yeah, I'm looking at your products, but also I need an air conditioning break so I can cool down. So, okay, thank you guys for sharing your relationship with summer. And if folks have any other just like thoughts around summer and what your relationship is with it, feel free to still write it in the chat. Okay, so let's check the weather today. So I actually pulled up this little screen share that I'm have kind of scrolling through is actually for Detroit. I was like, you know what, I'm gonna do Detroit today, mainly because my mother called me up at 10:30 last night. I was asleep, and she's like, yeah, the weather is so bad here because of the wildfires that essentially had happened in Canada, how are now spilling over to the Northeast, but also to Detroit. And what we're looking at right now is the air quality index, which is significantly high. It's at 436, and the max, I think, was 500. So that is definitely a high indicator of you don't want to go outside today. And then I also have this screenshot here just from last year, actually around this time, talking about how Atlanta had severe heat waves and just understanding really what that has to do with us, how we might be impacted by it. Because I think a lot of us typically in our day to day, we don't think about how climate change is impacting us, right? We're thinking about other things. What are we going to eat today? Or, what other pressing things are happening. But I just wanted to use this slide as a quick reminder of like, oh, these things actually do impact us, whether or not we think about it every single day. So make sure that you're continuing to check your weather app daily. So want to level set here and talk about extreme heat. Anybody familiar with the term extreme heat? Heard of it before? Feel free to raise your hand or put an emoji in the chat if you feel like, oh yeah, I've heard of extreme heat. I feel pretty comfortable about it. Okay. All right, well, we're going to go through and talk all about extreme heat today. I love this. So, essentially, when I'm talking about extreme heat, we're talking about when the temperatures are essentially hotter than what the normal is for that day, for that time, and for that place, which essentially has made it more dangerous to be outdoors or to be in those surroundings. And so, it's not so much just looking at the temperature every day, but more so being able to compare it and say, like, wow, today is 105. Last year it was like 95. So it has now upticked, and now we are now experiencing extreme heat because it is a lot hotter than what it typically is on this day from what we've seen in the past or in comparison to other days that week. But one of the things I want to differentiate between is the difference between weather and climate. So a lot of times, I know for me, I hear people say like, oh, there is no way that climate change exists because it's literally freezing and it's snowing here in Atlanta and we didn't get that years ago, you know? And so I think that that's kind of like a good example that a lot of us resonate with, because we're like, there's no way it could be climate change. It's too cold. But the thing with climate and the difference is that weather is more about short-term conditions. So if you're able to just look at your weather throughout the day, like we did in the last slide, and see like, okay, these are the changes throughout the day. And we know that weather can change and fluctuate throughout the day. I know in the Midwest, it is literally like it'll be snowing at one point, and then it'll be sunshine, and then it'll be wind or rain all in one day. And so that's when we're talking about weather, right? Because it'll fluctuate. Whereas climate, I always tell people, you know, the difference between weather and climate is weather is what you figuring out what you're wearing today. Whereas a climate is like, okay, what am I going to be keeping in my closet? Do I even need to have winter coats, or do I need to have 5 winter coats anymore when, you know, it really doesn't get that cold on an average? So climate looks more at what the long-term average is for the weather patterns, learning about how it changes gradually over a longer period of time. For example, Georgia has hot, humid summers. That's what the climate is in Georgia. Okay, so what counts as extreme heat? So the thing is, there's no exact or specific temperature that actually defines what extreme heat is. Like we can't say like, okay, look at your temperature, and if it says 101 degrees, that means that it's extreme heat today. That's not really how it works. It more so depends on the comparison between what the temperature normally is versus what it actually is. And so a good way to kind of make that comparison is actually if you go into your weather app, and I'm sure people have seen this, and it says it's 85 today, but it feels like 95. The number you want to pay attention to is what it feels like. And so that is normally associated with your heat index, because it can be whatever temperature it wants. We need to know how it feels outside, because that is what could potentially impact you and your health and should determine whether or not you feel comfortable and safe to go outside. So we're going to make sure we look at our weather apps, and we're going to see what it feels like outside. In addition to that, we're going to look at humidity, what the humidity levels are. Usually in extreme heat circumstances, it has higher humidity. And I know for me, I don't like to go out in humidity anyway, because my hair would just poof up all over the place. But humidity is definitely an indicator to look at. Same as overnight temperatures, being able to see like, okay, how is it going to feel overnight? Usually overnight it cools down, but if you're seeing that it's not much of a cool down overnight, that's also an indicator. And then of course, heat waves, like we also experience many times throughout the summer. Okay, so some of the outcomes. What are the outcomes of extreme heat? Well, the first is climate change. That's definitely something that we're seeing. We're seeing even longer summers, which for some people, it might be like, hey, I'm glad, bring the summer on. I love summer, you know? But I think that there's definitely a balance between wanting to have a longer summer, but also understanding that in that summertime, it means that the temperatures are even higher. And then also having more frequent heat waves, which those can last up to a week or even longer in many places. But one of the things that I do want to make sure that people know is that, you know, when we're talking about extreme heat, I think people automatically think that we're just solely talking about the climate and climate change and all of that. Those things are important, but ultimately, this is a public health issue. It's a public health emergency at that. And so, as a health professional myself, I want to make sure that I emphasize and reiterate to you all that this is a health conversation that we are having here today. Of course, the trees and all the other things are great, but we also have to protect our health first and foremost, especially as Black women. So the thing is that it's not just about how hot it gets, but also how our body is able to kind of just like relieve from the heat and how our body kind of responds to it. And so I'm going to talk about that in one of the next slides, just about kind of like how the health implications look like. One of the other things that I feel like most people do not know is that extreme heat is actually the deadliest weather related hazard. So it's not what we think it would be, like earthquakes, hurricanes, floods, all those things, tornadoes. Those, of course, can result in deaths and illnesses. However, extreme heat is the one that is most prevalent. So that makes this conversation even more important. Cool. Okay, so one of the other things I don't think many people think about is the fact that there are neighborhoods that are upwards of 10 to 15 degrees hotter than others. And a lot of that is unfortunately done by design. And I'm going to talk about that in the next slide. But I know here in Atlanta, we have a lot of stark differences in comparison, comparing to neighborhoods, Bankhead neighborhood and the Buckhead neighborhood. And so a lot of my work in the past has been around mapping and being able to understand differences in neighborhoods. And a lot of what we've seen is that there are life expectancy differences upwards of 24 years. People have a 24-year life difference depending on what neighborhood they live in. But we've also seen that there's up to 15 degrees hotter in some of those neighborhoods as well. And we'll unpack why that's the case and what that looks like. Okay, so believe it or not, extreme heat. Oh, I think someone may have just joined. Hello, thank you for warning us. Feel free to mute yourself. So why heat is an environmental justice issue. So there are many reasons, unfortunately, but I think that it's most critical to be able to better understand what that looks like. So this can look like urban heat islands, lack of access to trees. Many neighborhoods don't have trees. Asphalt, so that looks at the roads and what the roads look like. Historic red line, which we'll talk about in the next slide. Housing quality, energy burden, and then also limited access to cooling. So there's such a thing called cooling centers, and essentially you should be able to just Google cooling center near my house, and a list of cooling centers should be able to pop up. And essentially, those are locations where you can go to cool down. So have air conditioning. You literally, the sole purpose of them is for you to just relieve yourself from heat, especially because it costs a lot to have to run air conditioning in your own home every day. And many people do not have access to air conditioning and other means of cooling down. So definitely utilize cooling sensors. If you don't want to go to an actual center, or if there isn't one in a short distance from your house, you can also go to a mall. There's air conditionings in the mall, so might as well just go take a little window shop around the mall to help you kind of cool down. So definitely keep that in mind if you ever feel like you're experiencing extreme heat situation. So we actually hosted a really cool event last year. It was called the Hot Girl Climate Walk in collaboration with a really cool organization called Girl Trek. And so in that, we had kind of like a part teaching where we talked about extreme heat and how to protect yourselves. And then after that, we went for a little cool down and we went on a walk along the Atlanta Beltline. So that was just a really cool event that I wanted to highlight, where we were able to, one, have some education, but also get some physical activity in as well. Okay, energy burden. Anybody heard this term before? Term energy burden? Okay, so this term I love as well. So essentially, energy burden is basically the percent or the amount that you are paying every year on your energy bills. So if you really wanted to do the math, you could add up how much you're paying for your energy bills every year divided by how much you're making or your household income every year. And that will tell you what percent that you are spending on energy and electric bills every year. And so on average, we're supposed to only be paying about 3% of our income on our energy bills. However, there are many households that are paying upwards of 18%. I've seen some households, Black households at that, paying upwards of 25% of our annual income on energy bills, which really, really sucks. I know for me, my energy bill is out the roof. And so one of the caveats I always tell people though is that yes, it does depend on how much energy you're using, but it also depends on how much money you're making as well. And in a lot of our communities, we are not paid equitably. So I always tell people that this is yes an energy savings issue, but it's also an economic justice issue as well because ultimately many people just deserve to be paid higher ultimately. Um, so that's what I'll say on that. And then essentially, energy burden has a whole lot to do with extreme heat because we are more reliant on our air conditioning units in the summertime when it's hot. And so we're going to be running that even more often. But I also tell people that, this becomes a significant energy justice issue because many households are having to choose between, okay, do I run my energy? Do I turn the air on? Or do I pay for my prescriptions this month? Or do I send my child to daycare? Or do I put food on the table? And so extreme heat has a significant amount of impact on us as individuals and our families. And so making sure that we are, of course, protecting ourselves as individuals, but also making sure that we are advocating for policies that help to reduce the impact on energy bills on our communities. So the other thing is that when people essentially can't afford to cool their homes down, they are also impacted by different health things. And so that could be heat strokes, heat exhaustion, and even mental health issues too, which I'll talk later on about. The other thing that I'll mention around energy burden is the fact that many of our homes are older. I know my home was built in 1969. And so it's a little bit older. And so our air conditioning unit doesn't even cool down our whole house. And so a lot of times when we have older homes or homes that are not as durable, that we may be running the air or even the heat in some cases, and it still may not cool us down. So that is how extreme heat is related to energy burden. The other thing that I wanted to highlight too is we actually did a really cool event last year with an organization called Climate Power, and we hosted a brunch to the ballots event because we love brunch culture here in Atlanta. And so we use that as an opportunity to bring Black women together to better understand our public service commissioners. And that looks different, of course, in every state, but here, our public service commissioners, they decide how much we're going to pay for our energy. They decide how much our utility companies get to help us. And so we hosted an entire event to educate people. And then we headed over to the polls and made sure that we voted for our public service commissioners. So make sure that whoever your commissioner is in your community, that you're voting for people that actually are protecting your rights to energy access. Okay, so in addition to energy burden, energy justice, extreme heat is also connected to historic redlining. And I know what we're thinking, like redlining happened how many years ago? Unfortunately, not that long ago. And also, unfortunately, it still impacts us every single day. And so what we've seen is that historically redlined neighborhoods and communities have received fewer access and investments in things such as parks, such as trees and other infrastructure that actually does cool us down. We've also seen that those same neighborhoods, because they have access to fewer trees, they also have more concrete. I know you all have probably heard the term concrete jungle before. They often refer to New York is concrete jungle because that's literally just full of concrete everywhere. But that also warms the air, warms the temperature. But as we've seen, that historic disinvestment has shaped many things, such as our health, our housing, and then other climate outcomes that we're seeing today. And so I just wanted to put that out there so that you all can think from that perspective of just how things that have happened historically many years ago are still impacting us in this case, extreme heat. The last term that I want to kind of bring attention to is urban heat island. Y'all are learning a whole lot of terms today. So urban heat island is also very much connected to extreme heat. So urban heat island essentially occurs when cities are becoming significantly hotter than what their surrounding areas are. So a lot of like cities that have a lot of people like Atlanta, New York City, Chicago, places like that, it's a whole lot hotter than what it looks like on the outskirts of towns. And a lot of that is due to the fact that there's a lack of trees, there's a lack of green spaces. And we know from science class back in fifth grade that trees and other just like environmental things help to actually cool down the communities, of course, through shade, but also just like through the air and the oxygen and all that. The other thing that we've seen is that urban heat islands have increased things such as energy bills. People who live in those communities have higher energy bills. And we've seen that the health impacts have been more severe too. More people going to hospitals because they're experiencing different heat related illnesses. And a lot of that we have seen in many vulnerable and marginalized communities. So, vulnerability in extreme heat. So, I know I've kind of already alluded to this, but a lot of it that we've been seeing, especially in communities, have occurred around older adults. So, folks who are 65 years and older. Same for youth. I always tell people who are 5 and younger, they need to be inside if it is too hot outdoors and if we are experiencing extreme air conditioned race. For example, today in Detroit, it is very, very bad as far as the air quality because of the wildfires from Canada. And so I advise my sister, keep my nieces indoors. It is not safe for them to be outside. Many of our Black communities that we've seen significantly high extreme heat vulnerability there. We've also seen outdoor workers, so people who work in farming, people who work in construction, which hopefully you guys can't hear my background, but they're doing some type of construction by my house. And so outdoor workers are also at risk. Pregnant women, I always say, are significantly at risk when it comes to extreme heat. And so what we could do before, our limitations and our boundaries are a little bit different as we're pregnant. And then, of course, same for people who have chronic illnesses. So even something as simple as asthma, I would definitely advise that when it seems like there is an extreme heat event, that you do not go outdoors. And if you do, to please make it a quick trip. The thing is, like I mentioned and kind of honed in here, is that extreme heat isn't experienced equally. There are many vulnerable communities and people who experience it on a whole different level, even down to where you live at and what your zip code is. And so that's exactly why we call this a climate justice issue. So, how do our bodies get affected by heat? So I kind of broke this up into 3 main ways. And the first is heat exhaustion. So you may experience dehydration, dizziness, fatigue, headaches, even something small as like a muscle cramp, or even something elevated like nausea. So make sure that if you're feeling those symptoms, you are sitting down and trying to relocate to a cooler place. Heat stroke is also something that's very common as a result of extreme heat. So high body temperatures, look out for difficulty breathing. If your skin feels very hot or feels very dry when you're touching it, or if you're experiencing something like a seizure too, that could definitely be a result of extreme heat, unfortunately. And then the last one that I think people think the least about is really around mental health. And so it doesn't always have to be a physical health indicator. So this could be if you're feeling extremely moody, if you feel like you cannot sleep at night because you're so hot, or if you're feeling extra anxious or having difficulty concentrating, that could also be a result of experiencing extreme heat. So those are some of the things that I want all of us to look out for and possibly consider whether it could be related to extreme heat. Okay, so I want to talk about what you can do for yourself, and then we'll talk about what you can do for your community and all of that. But just as the what is it, the plain method of put your mask on first and then put other folks' mask on. Same here. So make sure that you are staying hydrated all day, every day. I think a lot of people think that we're drinking enough water, but it actually, when you look at the numbers, you're like, oh, I actually didn't drink that much water today. So use this right now as a sign to drink and take a sip of your water if you have not already today. Even if you have, you can never have too much water. So hydrating before you're even thirsty, avoiding those peak afternoon heats. So normally that happens around, I want to say 12 to about 3 to 4. I know for me, my office gets so hot around 3 to 4 p.m. I want to like take everything off. And so avoiding those times for like staying in the heat. Wearing very breathable clothing, very like light linens, avoid wearing black as I'm wearing black today. And then knowing where your cooling centers are. I always tell people pin those cooling centers because you never know when you or someone you come across needs to get to a cooling center. So make sure that you do that. And then always, just checking on your neighbors. I feel like that's something that we don't do as much as we used to do that back in the day. And then the final thing on here is making sure that you're checking that heat index again. Don't just look to see what the temperature is for today. Look and see what the heat index is. And again, you can do that by seeing what does it feel like today? Say, look, it's this temperature today, but it feels like 85. Okay, what you can do at home. So I tell people, make sure you close the blinds. I know I'm guilty of this because I just love the sunlight to come in. But on those very hot days, definitely close the blinds during the day. Reducing indoor heat sources. And so what I mean by this is avoid using the stove or the oven during peak times on days where it's very hot. Maybe just warm something up that you can do very quick using the microwave or the air fryer for 5 minutes. But I would not leave a very hot oven on or a stove and be cooking over a stove when it is a day that is extreme weather event. I would also say weatherize when possible. So, weatherization, and this may be a new term for many people, but essentially it's a form of insulation so that you can keep the cool air in and keep the heat out. And so that range can cost, very different amounts. And so if you have a home where you're like, okay, I want to get some increased insulation or I want to insulate the attic or things like that, you could definitely do that. There are many programs that actually help to cover those costs for you. So definitely check in with your utility company to see if if there's a program where they could essentially pay for it, or you could get some type of credits where you can get reimbursements. I know you can also write this off on your taxes as well. So we've done that in the past because we had to get new windows because we had a very old house and had to do some other insulation as well. But even thinking about the roof and the type of roof that you have on your house can definitely impact how cool your home can get. The other thing I'll mention on this slide is using fans correctly. And you're probably like, what do you mean using a fan correctly? Like, what other way is there to use a fan? Well, the thing is, you want to use your fans early in the morning and you want to open a window while it's very cool outside still. So before it reaches peak, you want to open your window, put your fan by the window, and help that to get as much cool air in. And what that does is it cools the house down or your apartment down as much as possible before it even reaches that peak. So that by the time that it does get hot, make sure that you close that window back up so you don't let the hot air in. Your home will already feel a little bit cooler than it normally would at that time. So these are just some quick things that you can definitely do at home that really shouldn't cost a lot. Okay, what can you do in your community? So first thing is planting trees. You can always plant trees. And I know people, and I used to be one of these people. I'm like, planting trees, what is that going to do for me? It turns out it actually can do a lot more than you think. Trees can help a lot with shade in your community. So volunteering to get some trees planted, or I think there may be some programs in some organizations that you can actually call up and say, hey, I want some trees on this neighborhood. Can you guys come out and plant some trees? And they will do it free of charge. advocating for shade. So being able to talk to your representatives and say that we need different things put in place so that we can have more shaded communities, especially I think a lot about the parks. Many of the parks in this temperature, they become unbearable and kids should not be sliding down slides in very hot temperatures. And so making sure that you are advocating for different shaded areas or even water pads too in your communities near the park so that kids have a little bit of sprinkle of water that they can be in. Supporting cooling centers. So talking to your reps about the cooling centers, going to those cooling centers and making sure that other people in your community know that they exist. Attending city council meetings, local neighborhood meetings, and making sure that community members are supported. They have everything that they need. So this is a perfect example, taking what you learned here today and talking to people in your community about it at the next neighborhood meeting. Reporting unsafe conditions. So if you see anything that feels unsafe or that it would be unsafe on an extremely hot day, definitely make sure that you report that. And then helping other people, especially during heat events. Many elderly communities, they don't have access or have support to a lot of things. And so just doing a simple door knock and checking in on somebody to make sure that they're okay works wonders. Okay, now I get to talk about the fun stuff. So, one of the things that my organization, Girl Plus Environment, does is we have an entire climate extreme weather kind of like broadcast kind of thing. And so I'll share some links. If you all were here yesterday, you know I love a QR code, but I'm gonna spend these next couple of slides kind of talking through some of the work that we're doing and how you all can get involved and take some action of your own. Okay, so this first one is our extreme weather resource hub that we actually just built out, I want to say maybe like a week ago. So this is still very, very new, but it has a ton of resources there already. And so you can go ahead and feel free to scan that QR code so that you can have access to all of these different things. So the first is we have a heat risk interactive map, which basically shows you what the heat levels are by location so that you can see what the dangerous temperatures are where you live and just kind of like what it looks like. The other thing you can do is you can check out our energy savings calculator. So this is really just kind of like a guide and of course is a calculator too for you to better understand how weather affects your home and your energy use and your bills and ways that you can reduce your bills. I know for me, anything that has to do with reducing my bills, I am all ears. So definitely check out that calculator. We have our Climate Action Center, which lists a ton of different policies and petitions that you can sign on to, some of which I'll chat about in the next few slides. We have a entire state and local heat policy agenda that we put together for folks to respond to and to look into and share with your representatives. We have some information on worker safety. So if you work outdoors or if you know someone who does work outdoors, definitely share that resource with them. And then we have a heat health action plan too that we gathered from the World Health Organization for you all to share. So definitely check out that hub. There's a ton of resources there already. We have even more coming. We've been working with the CDC Foundation, one of our largest funders, to make sure that we get as much information out as possible about extreme heat and just extreme weather events in general, especially as we enter hurricane season as well. Okay, the other thing that is on part of this kind of like hub, if you click that same QR code, is our Hot Girls Survival Guide, which we love. And so we're talking about things that you can do to make sure that you are safe when you're taking your hot girl walk this summer, making sure that you are either doing it in the morning when in school or doing it in the evening, taking a look at the temperature, being cautious about the things you're wearing on your walk, and making sure that you are bringing water on your hot girl walk. We talk a little bit about hair and the fact that the extreme heat can also impact that. It can impact the humidity, the poor quality, all of those things, and making sure that we are still able to keep up with our beauty routines, essentially, even when it's hot. The hottest of the hottest. The other thing we talk about is your nails. I don't think many people think about our nails, but especially if you're getting like acrylic nails or something similar, extreme heat the UV exposure, and also dehydration can affect your nail growth. And so when there's higher temperatures, it also impacts you as like a client getting your nails done, but also salon workers and other folks throughout the day. So that's a little tidbit that you probably didn't know. And then we also talk about how extreme heat, of course, can impact your wallets too, just as we mentioned, talking about the electric bills. So feel free to check out this Hot Girl Survival Guide. And then the next thing that I want to chat about is extreme high energy bills. Anybody here got a high energy bill? I know me, I'll put two hands up because I got double high energy bills. So yes, I see some folks in the chat interacting. So scan this QR code if you have a high energy bill, or if you yourself don't have a high bill, scan it for me or scan it for somebody else who does. And it probably takes about, honestly, I filled this thing out in about 60 seconds. And essentially, we are begging Congress to please do something about these energy bills. And so it's called IRBA, in energy rate bill rate something, where essentially we are asking Congress to relieve us from these high energy bills. So if you use a QR code and scan it today and just fill out your information, then you'll be able to tell Congress how these energy bills are impacting us. So I really do hope that you all fill out that QR code or fill out that quick survey. I'll give folks a second to leave that, make sure I'm good on time. Perfect. Okay. And we'll make sure to send out the slides as well to folks. And then the next thing that you can do is speak out against extreme heat. So we have another petition that is talking about the fact that extreme weather is putting our communities at risk. And so this includes, yes, extreme heat, but it also includes the wildfires that many of us are being impacted by today, or you may have family who is in the Northeast or in Michigan or the Midwest right now also impacted. It talks about floods and other extreme weather events. And I'm sure many folks on this call know that FEMA doesn't really exist anymore at this point. And so making sure that we tell Congress again that we are being impacted, our health matters, and we need to stand up against extreme weather events, and we need them to do something. So definitely make sure that you scan this QR code as well and fill out the really quick survey. Again, it probably takes 60 to 90 seconds to fill it out. So I really hope that you do let Congress know how important it is that we prioritize our health and well-being. Okay. All right, so speaking of awareness and speaking of action, things that you can do, some of the other issues that you can bring to your representatives include talking to them about cooling centers, telling them that we need more cooling centers. So if you go on Google Maps and you search and it doesn't look like you have many centers within close proximity to you to get to in case of emergency or as a precautionary, make sure that you talk to your representatives and say, hey, we need more cooling centers. Talking to them about affordable energy, just like hopefully you all just scanned that QR code, telling them about how we should not continue to have to pay energy bills for our utility companies. I think a lot of us look at our utility bills and we think, dang, we've been spending a lot of money on these on this air this past week, or like we need to turn lights off. Records and data actually shows that Black communities use the least amount of energy. I know for me, growing up as a kid in Detroit, my grandmother was very adamant about reducing energy. We reused our bags. She had plastic on her couch. We had to turn lights off when we were not in the rooms. That is not the issue. The issue is that when we look at our utility bills, and I challenge everyone to pull up their bills after this call, you'll see that there are fees on there. There's all types of stuff that our utility companies continue to sneakily put into our bills every single month. And so there is no reason at all why we should be having to overcompensate for utility companies because they're experiencing deficits or whatever the case may be. That is a problem for corporations. That is not our problems as community members. So definitely talk to your public service commissioners about that. Talking to them about heat related policies for schools, especially. I know here in the South, our kids go back to school very, very soon. They should not be going back to school in harsh conditions where it is just extremely too hot for them to learn and to be active in the classroom. So making sure that policies around school and heat exist, talking to representatives about public transit and making sure that we have shade over top of the bus stops, making sure that we have shade in other areas where people have to be outside for long hours is another important topic. Talk to them about access to trees. Tell them that you want more trees in your communities and more on the sidewalk so that people can safely walk to and from their destinations. And then the last thing that I would emphasize is talking to your representatives about what climate resilience planning looks like so that we don't get in these positions in the first place, making sure that we have different policies and programs in place that protect our health, especially of our vulnerable populations, people with chronic diseases, our elders, our youth have access to the things that they need to protect them from extreme heat events. So if you didn't know what to talk to your representatives about the next time you're going to your state capital or wherever you're going to be, that is a whole list of different issues that you can talk to them about that has everything to do with our health, our well-being, and economic justice and more. Okay, so just to wrap up, 3 things that you need to know before you go. So if you leave this conversation and you're like, okay, I don't know, this was a lot, these are the 3 things that you need. First is understanding that heat is the deadliest weather event. And so we have to take it serious. I'm not saying that we have to be anti summer. I love summer, but we do have to protect ourselves because it can definitely be deadly. The second is that heat impacts some communities far more than others. And most of those communities are vulnerable, and many of them have been Black communities because of historic disinvestment and things like redlining. So we have to protect ourselves. And then the last thing is that, we all have a role in this. And so I just gave you a whole plethora of things that you can do to stand up for yourself, your personal well being, things that you can do in your home, but also on a policy and community level. So I hope that you're at least able to take 1 to 2 things that you feel like you can kind of start to do to make sure that you are protecting yourselves during extreme heat instances. And then finally, stay connected. Feel free to stay connected on all the work that we're doing at Girl Plus Environment. Like I mentioned yesterday, we have an entire membership of almost 900 people across the US. And so we do trainings like this all over and tons of other different programs that we have too that you are welcome to check out. So that QR code actually brings you straight to our membership. And then thank you so much for having me. And I'm happy to answer any questions and would love to stay connected with folks. So thank you again for having me, Southern Black Girls Women's Consortium, and Joy. I really appreciate it being a part of this.
Oh, we appreciate you. I learned a lot. I'm a summer baby, but I like to stay inside because I don't like to be hot. But I appreciate you sharing, all the things as from trees to looking at my electric bill. The last 2 days have been very, very exciting. As I spoke of earlier, I've been scanning QR codes with the app you gave us yesterday. I feel like our community is better for knowing these things. A lot of times we assume some things, and what we do know for sure is that, as I told everybody yesterday, we all we got, but we all we need. And so I know that I appreciate you sharing your expertise with our community today. Um, I am opening it up for questions if anybody has any questions for Diamond. As I know you shared a plethora of information, but wanted to make sure that we did open it up for questions and allow people to ask questions if they had any, and they can come off mute or they can put it in the chat. I see you got some thank yous, and that you covered the bases, and you did. You covered a lot of bases. This will be on our, in our community on our YouTube so that it will go out to others as well. Once again, I appreciate you. I appreciate you sharing this information. Sometimes we don't think that Black and brown folks like to be in environmental justice, and we are. We are in it because of the places that we live and we stay in the communities that we serve. And so this is important to acknowledge and to know about. as Southern Black Girls is outside this summer on the Joy and Justice tour in the South, going through all these places, this is actually very important. I'm like, okay, where the cooling places at? Where the this, where the that? So we will definitely take this information and use it as we continue on. So I appreciate it. I will, if we don't have any questions, I will give you all back a couple of minutes to get to your next meeting because I know that we are booked and busy around here. So thank you so much, Diamond. Have a lovely day, everybody. Please stay connected to us as we will have more Sage exchanges. Follow us on social media and you can find out what's